early centuries. A miracle that took place in the 2nd century, to be specific, in the city of Colossae. The city was later renamed Chonae in memory of the extraordinary event. I might have mispronounced that. Chonae. In memory of that extraordinary event, the word in Greek, they changed from Colossae to Koinonia, because it means fisher. And I'll explain that in a moment. Colossae, of course, was the same city in which St. Paul had written his letter to the Colossians. Years earlier, in that city, a wealthy nobleman had built a church over a spring, dedicated the church to the Archangel Michael, because his mute daughter had been healed at that spring. Over time, a small but devoted community had grew around the church. Among them was a holy man named Saint Agrippus, the custodian of the church. A person without any pomp or circumstance. He was very much a blue-collar person, if you will, who served faithfully for 60 years. He watched over the church and its people with prayerful devotion, and he was a humble servant standing at the heart of a community of believers. The surrounding pagans, however, were troubled by the faithful devotion that they had witnessed. To them, a handful of Christians, a small chapel, and one devoted custodian must have seemed in some ways insignificant, and yet, as is so often the case, their envy turned to action. They couldn't even stand that there would be a little small thing doing its own thing. They conspired to destroy the church, planning to redirect 2 rivers and to flood the building and sweep away the faithful while they were hopefully praying. Agrippus, though, remained steadfast. He had become, of course, aware of their plans. He and the church had no army, they had no wealth, they had no worldly influence. What they had was prayer, devotion, and an unshakable trust in God. At the appointed hour, when the waters came rushing toward the church, they had interceded to the Archangel Michael, the patron of the community, and he appeared in his glory. And so, we are told, with a strike of his staff, he opened a fissure in the ground, and the waters were swallowed into the earth, diverted beneath the church. What had been meant for destruction became testament to God's protection and power. This miracle, as great as it was, spread across the Christian world. And these were some of the early things that the faithful had fed off of in order to cause the faith to grow. Teaching the many the power of patronal saints, the strength of prayer, and the truth that God never abandons his people. But today I wish to talk to you about one of the perhaps most important lessons from this miracle, especially for a small community like ours. Today, God's strength shines in what appears to be small or weak. The church in Colossae was not large or powerful. Its custodian, again, Agrippus, was a humble and unknown beyond his parish, certainly. And yet, it was precisely this simple faithfulness that allowed God to work a miracle. The world may see weakness, but God, of course, sees opportunity for his glory. What seemed fragile became the stage for divine power. The Apostle Paul reminds us, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness." This was from 2 Corinthians. This is not a call to despair or to think less of ourselves, but rather to be a reminder that God chooses to act through humble, faithful servants. Faithfulness, not size or influence, is what matters. Faithfulness and not size is what matters. Look at the church throughout history. The apostles were ordinary men, perhaps even arguably at times even subpar men. Some of them were fishermen, of course, others tax collectors, without power or prestige, intentionally so. And those who came to Christ with power or prestige, he made very clear that he needed to remove that from them. They could no longer be powerful if they wanted to follow him. Yet the church they nurtured spread across the world. The miracle at Colossae reminds us that God does not need numbers or armies. One faithful person praying with a devoted heart is enough for God to act. One small parish offering worship, prayer, and love can become a beacon of God's glory. This should encourage us and every other small parish, every tiny mission, every group of believers who may feel unnoticed. Smallness is not a limitation. It is actually precisely where God delights to show his power. To the pagans of Colossae, one little chapel, one humble custodian may have seemed completely irrelevant. But, as I said, this is what God needed to show his miracle. You know, it's easy for us to, and we do this, don't we? It's a way that we behave. If things go well in our life, we begin to count it very much to the assets that we had in order to make it go well. I knew this, I had this strength, I had those skills, we had those people, we were able to accomplish it because we had all of those things. And then when we do that, we rob the opportunity of giving glory to God. There becomes no miracle, because every good thing is our own works, even sometimes the bad things. But it's so perfect how, of course, Christ could have set up his church in any way. He could have preached to Pilate, he could have had Caesar on board. There's no reason why that couldn't have been the case. Christ could have gone to Rome, but he went to Nazareth, he went to Galilee, he went to the small, in order to prove that this was a miracle of God, the church that was being wrought in this world. He chose the small things of this earth to humiliate the greater things. And it says in the scriptures today, for such is his gracious will, that it's out of the mouths and babes and infants that he will teach the world perfect praise. This pattern runs throughout salvation history. Israel was small, and yet God chose them. Moses was taken out of the Pharaoh's court and was made into a shepherd, and yet God chose him at that time to lead a nation. David was just a boy with a sling, and yet God used him to defeat a giant. And when God came into the world, he himself did not appear as a mighty king, which of course he could have, but as a humble child in a manger, in a cave. He walked among the poor and lived in obscurity. And yet, in his life and death, he revealed the ultimate power of God. At Colossae, God did not act through armies or overwhelming force. He acted through the prayers of one faithful man and a faithful community. Weakness became the throne of God's power. Weakness became the throne of God's power. And this is a reminder to us today, what seems small in the eyes of the world is often where God's glory will shine the brightest. We do not need to compare ourselves, whether personally or as a parish or as a family or whatever case. We do not need to compare ourselves or measure ourselves by numbers or envy any other largeness. What matters is faithfulness, prayer and love offered with humility. One committed parish, one dedicated group of believers is more than enough for God to work his wonders. God delights in the small acts of devotion, and it is precisely there that his strength is revealed. The miracle at Colossae is not just the story of the past. It is a living word for us today. It tells us that God will never abandon his church or his people, even when the church seems small. Even if it is in a basement or in a room of a united church. God will not abandon it. And in fact, actually, I can tell you that both Father Deacon Michael and I have noticed this even in the hinterlands of Alaska when we went to go see where St. Olga came from. Again, as I might have told you in the past, it amazed me just how unkept perhaps that community was. There was no paved road, it was gravel. The houses and even the church, which looked like maybe perhaps the nicest building there, was made out of siding. Not something that we in Toronto very much like. We like brick, don't we? many of the homes were made out of plywood, even from its exterior. And there is where St. Olga came from. There is where the first female saint of North America came from. It was not from the cathedral. One humble parish quietly offering worship and love can become a testimony of God's power and mercy. Let us embrace our smallness these days. It is an opportunity for God's strength to be revealed. Our parishes, our communities, and our personal efforts do not need to be grand or impressive. They need to be faithful. God can accomplish mighty things through humble hearts. Like St. Agrippa's standing vigil over a small chapel by a simple spring, we too are called to guard the corners of God's kingdom that are entrusted to us. I think back, dear brothers and sisters, before I finish today's thought, I think back to the way that we are at St. Silouan. We now have sort of the pleasure of saying that we're growing and we have no idea what we're going to do. Now we're thinking about, those of you that are unaware, we're thinking about setting up carpets and putting the chairs to the periphery because we don't know that we can have everybody on some of those more larger Sundays. We have catechumens joining us. How wonderful. In the early days, back 6.5 years ago, I don't know that I thought that way. I thought we better have larger chairs so nobody notices that there's nobody here. Make them really regal looking so everybody feels super important when they come in. Let's do something really big in order to make sure that people realize how big we are. Let's see if we can move the ceiling a few feet taller. I don't know what we thought. But I think it was the faithfulness of the community. It was the humble prayer. There were the many custodians who hide in the corners. Now the church grows, and here we are seeding yet another church. It almost seems, at least for me in my own personal life, and perhaps for many of you, since we're in the same boat, those of you that are part of the community proper, that it seems that God has wanted to humble me throughout my life. That He made sure that I would always do the small things. And perhaps that is also good for you. Because maybe if we do the big things, maybe I might begin to think of myself that I'm capable to do all the big things. And there is no God. I need God. Because only He will take such small things and make them multiply throughout the years. Brothers and sisters, I wish to tell you all, take courage, especially in moments of difficulty or what might seem like overwhelming futility. This, after all, is old hat to God. Since before time, He had been raising up the small to humiliate the great. And this is also old hat for the church over the last 2 millennia. They had started in prisons, and now they have changed the face of the earth. What seems small in human eyes is full of potential in God's hands. The Lord of hosts, therefore, we can see, is with us. He is with us in our personal lives and in this mission parish of St. Olga. Just as the community turned toward their patron, the Archangel Michael, to protect them, let us turn to our patroness in prayer, which is never in vain. Let us rejoice in our calling, both personally and as the community of St. Olga. However modest it might seem, and let us trust that God's glory will shine through us, revealing His power to the world just as He deems fit. And glory be to God forever. Amen.